Will Microsoft's takeover of Activision spell game over for the console wars?
And what are telcos doing to fight simjacking?
And what does chip oil have to do with getting an electric vehicle across the outback?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, back from my week off, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Kidman. Now, Alex, considering that you love crypto about as much as you love sport, how excited are you about the fact that the AFL has signed up Crypto.com as its official cryptocurrency exchange and trading platform?
Look, Adam, we've done 362 episodes of this show. And I've got to tell you, the last time I was even vaguely interested in who was sponsoring a sports team, it was 1999, and it was only because Sega was sponsoring the Arsenal football team in the UK because of the launch of the Dreamcast. It had nothing to do with football. I don't care.
Do you think this will be as successful as the Dreamcast?
Look, I think it doesn't bode well. Let's put it that way.
Speaking of wildly fluctuating value, we're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios this week by our fifth Beatle. It's finders Angus Kidman. Gus, how do you think that the AFL feels about the fact that Crypto.com was apparently hacked on the same day to announce the deal?
Look, I think the AFL is just happy anyway, any day that it's not dealing with a scandal that's about either racism or sexual assault. So it's still probably a net gain for them.
True. Hacking is a plus, really, in their book. So it's a surprisingly busy week in tech news for a January, with Microsoft dropping billions to buy mega publisher Activision. We'll talk about that in a minute. And Alex has a special report which combines the Australian desert, electric vehicles, takeaway burgers, and technology. Sounds tasty. But first, simjacking. Gus, what is simjacking?
Well, it's not, an unofficial and unpleasant thing that you can do with Sims in the popular game with the same title. I must say that first. So, no.
It's not that Mick Jagger, Emilio Estevez movie? Because that's what I thought it was.
No, that's Free Jack. That's totally different.
Easy mistake to make.
No. So simjacking is basically when someone basically steals your mobile number from you. They effectively say, hey, I need to transfer this to a new SIM. They pretend they've lost their old one or something like that, and they get it transferred over. And the reason they want to do that is not so that they can make lots and lots of phone calls on your behalf. It's so they can get access to that sweet two-factor authentication that you've hopefully set up on your bank account, and then basically rip a large amount of money from you. There are other criminal uses for simjacking, but that's the number one purpose, is just to get access to that. And it can be surprisingly easy because really you ring up a telco, you say, hey, this is my date of birth, this is my name. Often that's all you need to get the number transferred in some circumstances if you can come up with enough convincing details. So it's been a really big problem for quite a while.
And there's two ways this can happen, isn't there? There's number porting, where I know a number is, we'll say, with Telstra. So I ring Optus and say, hey, can you port my number from Telstra across to Optus? Or there's a SIM swap where I know a number is with Telstra. So I ring Telstra and say, I've lost my SIM card. Can you send me another one? Yes?
Yeah. So both these approaches, can be surprisingly successful because the controls in this place are, they're not that great. And so it has been a growing problem. And it got to the point where I think it was in May last year, the ACMA, which is the regulator for this stuff, actually called out three major telcos, including Telstra and Optus, and said, hey, you've done this badly. And it must have been really, really bad for that to happen, because I don't want to say that ACMA is a toothless tiger, but if I was drawing a picture of it, it would be a striped animal with no teeth.
So when you annoy ACMA, it's pretty bad, yeah.
You're going to get gummed pretty badly, I guess.
Gummed pretty bad.
It strikes me that this might be a problem that's also been exacerbated in the last 2 years, because with so many people working from home, you've got your phone contract, but you're not really paying attention to stuff like mobile data or that kind of usage. You're not going to notice quite as quickly that your phone number's been ripped away from you because you're on your Wi-Fi and you're doing a lot of this stuff over, calls over Wi-Fi, that kind of stuff as well, relative to the years prior.
And these attacks happen pretty quickly, because the main thing that they use it for is to get into your bank account and transfer money. So when the number port or the SIM swap happens, in theory, as soon as their dodgy copy starts working, your phone stops working. But if they do that at 5 in the morning and then get straight into your online banking because they've already got your login and password because they tricked you into handing it over or whatever, and say, all right, I want you to transfer $10,000 to this dodgy offshore account, it says, okay, but you'll need the two-factor code. Text them the two-factor code. Bang, the money's out. You're still asleep. By the time you realize your phone has stopped working, it's already too late, isn't it?
Very often that is the case. And of course, that's what they're hoping for. Like they're going to time it to try and do it in this way. And of course, it's all exacerbated. No one's going into stores much. No one's getting out and about. So even solving the problem can be harder. So yeah, we had some call outs last year on saying to telcos, look, do better, basically, like get some better systems in place. And then I think this week we've had some sort of developments from Telstra saying, oh, hey, we've actually managed to come up with something slightly intelligent that maybe helps with this problem a little bit.
So it was interesting. It's the usual thing with Telstra. They put out a press release and you think, oh, I'll write a story about that. And then you think, no, hang on, I'll look into the background and figure out why Telstra's saying, hey, look, what we're doing is so great. And they're doing what they're doing is so great because last year they got told off for doing the wrong thing. You've always got to dig beneath the surface when you get a press release from Telstra telling you how wonderful they are.
Although, to be fair and balanced, the same can often be true for Optus and
Oh,
Vodafone
true.
as well.
Yeah. I'm not saying they're alone there, but it is the first thing that comes to mind whenever I get a press release from Telstra is, okay, what's the full story here?
No. And it's an interesting story because essentially what Telstra have said they've done is that they're making it easier for the banks to check with them if they think that a transaction is suspicious. And look, banks are actually pretty good at this stuff. Like, I think we've all had that experience of like where the first we know about a dodgy transaction is actually the bank says, hey, did you actually do this? And you go either yes or no. Essentially, what Telstra said is, oh, if a bank's gets a query, and gets asked to authenticate something, it can send a check to us and we'll give it a score that says, oh, basically, we think this transaction's fine or this could be a little bit dodgy, which is helpful. But at the same time, it's kind of relying on the bank to do the heavy lifting. That was my immediate thought about it.
I did check this with Telstra, and they said it'll run via an API and can be set up to pretty much happen in real time. So the bank sends a message to Telstra through the API and says this number's asked for a one-time code, and Telstra does a quick check and says, well, actually, that was SIM ported yesterday, so we're going to flag that as probably risky. So if it works the way they say it will, it should be pretty seamless and pretty quick. It doesn't rely on the bank to pick up the phone and go, hey, Telstra, is this okay?
Although, and this is a little bit more anecdotal, I've talked about this on the show before, actually. The banks themselves can be quite quick on this stuff. I had an instance where my credit card number was compromised and someone tried to buy a bunch of sunglasses in the middle of the night. And my bank contacted me, it wasn't that late, and said, hey, is this actually you? And I went, nope. And they cancelled my card. This was how I discovered how quickly you can get Apple Pay back up and running. So the banks are already sort of on top of this, but it does make me think, wouldn't we be better off using other authentication services other than SMS for our banking anyway?
Well, I think it highlights the point that you should really not be relying on just even 2FA is maybe not enough, and maybe you still want that biometric element to be a part of it because you have the combination of biometric and 2FA. That is a lot harder to disrupt. It also means, that we did need improvements in the number porting security process, so you couldn't do that too easily. That's a hard one to sort of get into because you don't want number porting to be difficult. We can all remember when number porting actually really sucked and it was painful, and changing telco was the equivalent of basically getting a root canal. So you don't want that part of it to be broken, but you do want there to be better security. So I think making sure that they've stepped up on that front is going to remain equally important.
Well, there's two aspects to that. Another thing that Telstra announced is that they're adding the option for customers who use the Telstra My ID app or whatever it is to use facial biometrics and to add a PIN, which makes it easier for them to prove to Telstra when they're talking to Telstra customer support that they are really who they say they are. But the other thing is that some banks, like mine, have the option of, oh, you can download an app like an authenticator app to have on your phone. And then when you want to do a big transfer, instead of getting an SMS, you can open the app to get the one time code. Except my bank gives you the choice. So you open it up and it says, do you want to use the app or do you want to get a an SMS code? At which point the scam is going to think, what should I do?
Yeah.
Like, really?
But that's it.
Telstra, sorry, not Telstra. The bank should at least offer you the option to say, all right, we will never send you an SMS to keep you safe because you have elected to do this via the app.
But that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because then what happens, Adam, if you accidentally drive your car over your phone or it gets smashed or dropped or broken, you need to transfer some money to make a mortgage payment or whatever it is you're doing with your large sums of money. I don't know. Then you're going to want that flexibility. Like
That's the
there's a
same with all
line there.
two-factor, though. That's the
But
danger
this is
with
where
all
this is
two-factor.
where I
What
think
happens?
this is where multi-factor I think is the way to go as long as your bank actively supports it.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think you want that multi-factor going on there. I think it's good to have. It is good that Telstra's leaning in to say we're going to make our app more flexible. That's an improvement. You need to recognise that lots of people still won't use the app. I was in a phone store the other day for the first time in many moons, and what struck me was the sheer number of people who were just coming in to pay recharges on their phone. And I thought, none of these people are ever going to use an app. That's
Hmm.
never going to happen.
It's also, I mean, the facial recognition thing is really interesting because you get that on a ton of phones now, but not all facial recognition is the same. For the vast majority of phones outside the iPhone ecosystem, they are working off a pretty much flat 2D image. It's stuff that's been shown that can be spoofed pretty much with a photo of you if someone's got that. And again, if I'm lined up to rip off Adam, I probably have a photo of him. And actually, I've got a plan.
Now you mention
I might just have
it.
to I might just have to leave for a bit.
Yeah.
And
I'm thinking we could lean into the voice recognition side of it because then I think I can impersonate you and vice versa. So there's lots of possibilities here.
and the average loss for this kind of scam is $10,000. And the reason why it's so high is because the scammers tend to target business owners. They're not after you and I so much. They're not after your average person on the
They're
street.
not after you, Adam, because you've got no money.
Well, that's true.
You're
Yeah.
a freelance journalist.
Come at
It's
me.
the life we live.
Come at me, bro. But pay a few bills while you're in there. But yeah, they aim at business accounts because they know that they're gonna have tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting there. They're not really interested in chump change, and that's why the average losses tend to be so high.
Okay, so we've talked about EVs quite a lot on the show recently, and one of those inevitable topics that comes up with EVs is around range anxiety and things like that. And for a lot of people, that might not be a big issue if you live in a big city. But what if you had to do one of the longest drives you can do in Australia, say from Adelaide to Perth? People have done it, but in a kind of risky fashion or genuinely relying on the kindness of strangers. But there's a new solution in town. I'm chatting to John Edwards, a retired engineer, and the brains behind BiØfil, a rather unique EV charging solution. Welcome to the show, John.
Yes, hi.
Tell me about BiØfil. Why is it different to other EV charging solutions that people might be aware of?
Okay, BiØfil's basically a standard uh, EV charging uh, system powered by a generator that's fueled with renewable fuel, which is obtained from the roadhouse where it's situated.
And this is a roadhouse that's on the Nullarbor Plain. I think we can kindly say it sort of is the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah, very remote locations are uh, the aim of this charger. Places where completely off grid, where they're generating their own power from diesel generators, and usually these locations, the power is not ideal. Basically, phases go to the caravan park, freezers, all sorts of things. Not ideal for EV charging. So this biofuel's a standalone unit. It takes the waste oil from the kitchen, turns it into electricity and charges the EV.
So, I mean, I think people have probably heard of the idea of using like waste food oil to make biodiesels and things like that. Um, I guess one of the questions that some people might have though is you're in the middle of the Nullarbor, not a whole lot of trees around. Why not go solar?
Okay, so to set up a solar system with sufficient storage capacity to fast charge an EV is a significantly expensive uh, exercise. If you want to charge it a reasonable 50 kilowatts or something like that, you need a fairly large battery, and these things are very expensive. The biofuel is basically a very inexpensive interim solution before battery and solar can be justified.
Okay, I think that the figure I've seen for biofuels around $75,000 for a charge or something in that range.
something of that range. I mean, we've installed one of these, the first one on the Nullarbor, for about that amount of money, and it's been principally funded by the community and also volunteers to install it. I mean, commercially it'll be a little bit more expensive than that, but the base cost is around that figure.
Right. Okay. And it's a bit like the diesel generators you're talking about that get used off grid. This is also a generator solution, not a battery backed solution. Is there an engineering reason for that, or is it just a cost basis thing?
Well, it is an engineering solution in the fact that these diesel generators will run on canola oil and cottonseed oil, which is renewable fuel. In fact, the original diesel engine was invented using peanut oil. It's a perfect fuel for the engine, and it's readily available at no cost as a waste product on the site. Just ticks all the boxes and generates electricity and charges the EVs.
Nice one. Is there a capacity constraint? I mean, if 5 EVs turn up at once, is the Roadhouse going to have to say, "Well, look, we've only got enough chip oil for 4 of you"?
Right. So at the moment, we get 5 EVs crossing the Nullarbor, for example, in a year. So that's less than one every 2 months. Um, the production of waste oil at these places is equal to about 2 or 3 EVs a week. So we're a long way away from oil supply becoming a problem.
Oh, excellent. That's really good. I suppose given some EV owners are very environmentally uh, minded, I suppose
Yeah.
uh, there may be some concern. It's a generator. You are burning a fuel. Is this actually green?
Okay. So what the generator's doing is basically delivering solar energy to the car, right? And here's how it goes, right? So the canola plants uh, grow and they absorb some sunlight and they take CO2 from the atmosphere. The greenhouse gas CO2 is absorbed from the atmosphere, it's combined with the sunlight, and it makes the oil in the seeds of that plant. That oil is extracted, it's used for commercial purposes, frying chips and what have you. And then as it goes through the generator, it is liberating the solar energy that's been collected by those plants. It's putting the CO2 back where it came from and delivering that energy to the vehicle. It's totally carbon neutral. In fact, it's a great example of pure net zero operation.
I guess it might. Well, I don't know what they do with the waste oil right now. It might even be better than that if they've got to kind of ship it out or dispose of it in some way.
Well, as soon as you start shifting things, you're creating a carbon footprint. So
Hmm.
they don't shift it. There's nobody that I know of is collecting this stuff out in these remote areas, and from what I can see, it gets disposed along with other waste in a landfill situation.
Right. So this is genuinely quite a positive kind of thing. As a generator, is there any kind of startup time with it? I think what I've seen suggests it's a for the typical EV that can make that journey. Not a lot of them would be able to anyway. It's about an hour to charge up or to fully charge the battery on most of them.
Yeah, yes, and that's no different to the city. If you've got a 400 kilometre range EV and your battery's near flat, it will take an hour on a 50 kilowatt size charger. That's a typical 45 minutes to an hour to recharge to head on to the next destination. And that's sort of accepted around the EV community. I mean, we are installing faster chargers as time goes on, but for the moment, out in these remote areas, if you can get a full recharge of your EV in 45 minutes to an hour, then that is awesome, and away you go.
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, there's a roadhouse right there, so you can also stop for a coffee and a meal. It's a bit of a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely, and a rest break. I mean, to drive 400 kilometres is 3.5 to 4 hours. Drivers need a rest at that point, and no better way to take a rest than charge. Put your car on the charger and go and have a coffee and a burger.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now you're a non-profit, and you're doing this essentially to kind of fill what is a very large gap in the so-called electric highway. But at the moment, you don't particularly have plans to kind of scale this out. We're not entirely at this stage going to see this, in every roadside service station kind of deal.
No, this is a very specific application. The states are rolling out their individual electric highway plans, and WA's got an excellent electric highway plan from Kununurra to Esperance, from Perth to Norseman, and South Australia equally have an excellent rollout in progress, from Adelaide to Border Village on the border. But there's a 700-kilometre gap that nobody seems to want to tackle, and we figured, well, we need to close that gap, because once these things come online, we want to be able to. Western Australians definitely want to drive to eastern states, and we believe there's a bunch of people in eastern states want to come to us as well, and it just makes sense to get that fixed up so that we can drive straight through.
Okay, and as I understand it, at the moment, if you do make it to the Roadhouse, the charging is free, but they are looking at a paid solution, which is again pretty much in line with what the entire EV charging market's doing, right?
Yes, so these guys that it's taken me several months, maybe nearly 8 months, to convince these guys that we need to do this, and I think they're offering a free charging initially to try and attract some business. But the going rate's about about twice the rate in the city, and their labour costs are higher, and things like that, and maintenance costs are higher due to distances and everything like that. So, the nullarbor at the moment is $1 a kilowatt hour. That's the going rate, and the going rate in the city is about 45 cents. And at the end of the day, it's ending up half the cost of tanker petrol anyway. So it's win-win for the EV drivers.
Yeah, and obviously half the cost of a tank of petrol and not stopping because your battery runs out is also a big plus.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's this project we've just completed is Kyguna, which is right in the centre of the WA nullarbor. It's 370 k's from the SA border, 370 k's from Norseman, and we've gone ahead and put a little top-up charger halfway between those points so the guys can, if they're worried about the 400k situation, they can stop every 200 k's, do a top-up charge, and make sure they're going to get to their destination.
Oh, that's excellent. Actually, I mean, that opens it up to quite a few more EVs as well.
Exactly.
In terms of range, that's a really smart solution.
Yeah.
Do you have any other plans in terms of other areas, other gaps in the electric highway you'd like to fill?
We have been, well, like over the last 3 years, putting these things at strategic spots, awaiting the state infrastructure to come along. So our first spot was Arthur River, which is a place halfway between Perth and Albany, and that was very successful. And then the state put a charger in nearby, so we took that away. We have one currently in Jurien Bay, which is halfway to Geraldton, and that is currently in use and running on the Roadhouse's veg oil, and quite successfully. And the state will be putting something in there in the next 18 months to 2 years. When that happens, we'll take that unit away and go further afield. So we're basically, it's a EV community-driven effort to spot these things where they're necessary to, open up the traffic and allow the guys to get to where they want to go. And then once the state infrastructure comes along, then we move on to the next priority location. One of the little misconceptions is, as soon as people see a diesel generator, they immediately think emissions, right? And basically write the thing off. But this thing's converting solar energy, or it's liberating solar energy out of the oil, and it is net zero. And what I say to a lot of people is, there's all this talk about net zero by 2050. Well, these units by 2050 will be operating net zero for 28 years. So we're kind of there, starting the ball rolling with this thing. And it's a great solution that ticks all the boxes. I mean, the fuel's there. There's no extra work really to do. We just utilise that fuel. It's no cost to the Roadhouse, just a bit of labour. And it's opening up these remote areas for EV drivers. It's sort of a triple win for everyone.
Sounds excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Cool. Fantastic.
Okay, so every single time that I think, hey, it's early in the year, there's no more big news stories that are going to break this week, something big comes along. And in this case, the biggest tech news story of the week would have to be Microsoft rather suddenly announcing that it was going to spend 68.7 billion US dollars buying up Activision Blizzard. I'm joined by Tim Biggs from the Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, this is a lot of money to spend on Activision Blizzard. Do you think Microsoft's getting value for money?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a complicated issue, right? And it's hard to tell what their intentions are because they're not allowed to say anything until the deal's closed. But I think long term, probably they are. I mean, Activision Blizzard, of the things that they own, Call of Duty is the most obvious thing to touch on. In the recent numbers from the US, the last two Call of Duties were the two highest selling games last year. So that's last year's Call of Duty and the previous year's Call of Duty. It's absolutely massive. It's a cash cow. And as Microsoft's trying to set itself up, for a future where it's more of a content service provider than a console manufacturer, it wants to have as many of those big heavy hitters as possible. So, the same way Netflix wants to have something every single month to keep you subscribed, Microsoft wants that too. And why wouldn't you go for the biggest around? And as you sort of implied, they paid more money for Activision than you might expect, looking at Activision's current market cap and their current share price. But I think that's not that all common when we're talking about publicly traded companies. And I think Microsoft would not have dropped, close to whatever 100 billion Australian dollars if they weren't absolutely sure they were getting their money's worth.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only frame of reference we've got on this in terms of Microsoft spending up big on gaming was Minecraft, which was something like $2.5 billion. That seemed like a lot for one game. Here, they're getting like 40 years worth of games in a way.
Sure, and they also bought ZeniMax Media for 7 billion, I think.
That's right. Yep.
So that was the biggest ever gaming deal at the time, and got them the Elder Scrolls and Doom and Wolfenstein, and we all went, wow, like they're serious about this. But now it's no secret that Activision Blizzard rather has been run really shoddily for a number of years. They've basically pulled all the talent they have into churning out Call of Duty games, ignored all their great studios that they own, all the great IPs that they own. But if Microsoft really wants to leverage that, and I'm sure they will, they have 40 years worth of stuff that they can pull from. They've got Crash Bandicoot and Spyro and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and on the Blizzard side, they've got Warcraft and Starcraft and Overwatch and Hearthstone. They've got stuff going back a long time. My immediate thought was that I want a new Blackthorn, which was called Black Hawk in America, and nobody really remembers it, but it was a great early Blizzard game on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give it to me. There's so much that they could do. There are so many talented studios at Activision Blizzard, Sledgehammer and Raven, and all the people that are making Blizzard stuff, and all the people that have had to do support on Call of Duty, like Beanox and Toys for Bob. And since Microsoft's growing their IP as well, there's no reason you couldn't take something they own, like a Banjo-Kazooie, and give it to Toys for Bob and say, they're the guys who made Skylanders, and say, make a new Banjo-Kazooie. It's just, I understand that there's a lot, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, there's a lot of people who are concerned about consolidation of corporate interests in video games. But from purely a gamer's perspective, I feel like it's absolutely a positive thing.
They also get to dive into the worlds of things like MMOs because they now get World of Warcraft, and even mobile gaming because they get, I think it's King who do Candy Crush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because Microsoft's long-term plan is to offer Game Pass on as many different devices as possible, you can see why someone who specializes in mobile game design like King would be beneficial for them to have. And on the other hand, I'm sure there'll be some concerns because Activision generally has increasingly relied on fairly dodgy monetization efforts, whether it's in-game purchases or loot boxes. And people might worry that Microsoft's going to get into that. And they totally could. Look, in 10 years' time, I'm not willing to say what it's going to look like. But for right now, I think they're saying all the right things. And Microsoft's management has, especially over the last 10 years, seemed committed to creating a wide open and equitable and accessible space for games. So I'm optimistic at the moment.
Okay, you mentioned that Activision's sort of been running a lot of things into the ground. The other elephant in the room here, though, is that Activision has been plagued with a lot of scandals as well. And obviously, we've got to be careful about what we legally say here, but they've certainly not been scandal free. Does this acquisition change that at all?
I mean, again, it's going to be tough because obviously Phil Spencer, who's the CEO of Microsoft Gaming, he can't come out and say, "I'm going to clean this up and I'm going to be the boss," because legally they have to pass a bunch of hurdles before they're even allowed to insinuate the kind of things that they're going to do once they take control of them. But you have to imagine that uh, if it wasn't a main sort of impetus for them buying Activision Blizzard, it was at least a consideration that here are all these great IPs. Here's Call of Duty. It's under the stewardship of a team that are clearly slime balls. I think we can say that legally, and it's
As long as we don't name any names, sure.
I don't think it's a case, that Microsoft is handing out $100 billion purely to save people, but I think it is the case that they recognize these kind of big properties aren't sustainable under leadership like that. And they've given very subtle hints about you mentioned there's been scandals, there's been sexual harassment scandals, there's been employment scandals, there's been the kind of thing a certain CEO is accused of impersonating the only female board member he has to say awful things. There's all sorts of stuff, and Phil Spencer has been very, I guess, subtle, but in his sort of blog post, he had a picture of the Microsoft, gaming board, and it is a majority women. And he even put their preferred pronouns on there. And I think he's very subtly saying, "This is what we're about." He even said, this kind of thing is what we value, and although we also value individual studio cultures, we are going to hold every single studio to these standards. And to me, that says the current CEO of Activision is going to be gone, most of the boards are going to be gone, and they're all going to report to Phil Spencer, and if they're not up to code, then they're not going to be at the business any longer.
We must be working off a different definition of subtle, because that felt to be about as subtle as a brick.
Yeah.
That image was not. That image is a great thing, don't get me wrong, but it was not there accidentally.
No.
You mentioned consolidation as well. And there's obviously, there's a few other bigger players, your EAs and your Ubisofts and so on, although I think their market caps they'd be a bit cheaper to buy than Activision Blizzard would be. But what does this mean for the other console hardware players, for Sony, for Nintendo?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a little bit complicated, but I notice a lot of people on Twitter sort of immediately jump to, this is unfair. Microsoft's going to have a monopoly. They're going to be the biggest player in gaming. And I mean, if you look, Microsoft obviously as a whole is much bigger than any gaming company because it's a tech giant. It's with trillions of dollars. It's huge. But in terms of gaming revenue, if you add Microsoft's gaming revenue to Activision's, they're still going to be third on the list. Sony and Tencent, which is a Chinese firm that's been buying up shares all over the place, they're both going to still be above Microsoft. So it's not like all of a sudden Sony's going to be in trouble. Like Sony, there's so many reasons to buy a PS5 aside from Call of Duty or any Activision property. Like they've got such a strong portfolio and so many strong studios that I think in reality, if you're someone who only plays on PlayStation and only plays Call of Duty, you're probably going to be worried about this. And there's going to come a time, probably not this year and maybe not even next year, but there is going to become a time where you have to either get an Xbox or subscribe to Game Pass on some platform to play Call of Duty. But that specific gamer aside, I think this kind of raises Microsoft closer to where something like a Sony is in terms of gaming capabilities. It certainly doesn't eclipse Sony. And they're so different too, because like I said, Microsoft is really trying to get all their ducks in a row for this, content pipeline, whereas Sony, at the moment at least, is still focused on these prestige AAA a couple of times a year, exclusive games. The fact that they also had Call of Duty on the platform, was a moneymaker for them, but I don't think it's going to put them in trouble not having it.
Yeah, well, given Microsoft's position, basically saying, look, we're more games as a service than we are a gaming hardware, everyone please buy an Xbox company, you've got to imagine they would be quite happy for Game Pass to come to the PS5 if they could wrangle that kind of deal.
That would be a tough sell, to Sony. And on the Nintendo front, a lot of people have also been like, you look at Nintendo's financials, they're not that much bigger than Activision Blizzard. What happens if Microsoft strolls in with another $100 billion and buys Nintendo? And it's like, A, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Microsoft, but B, Nintendo is a publicly traded company in Japan who have absolutely no interest in selling. They're not in a dire position like Activision is. It's not going to happen. And so when you look at Nintendo and Sony, I think they're going to be relatively unharmed by this. And if you're a PC gamer, then great, because Game Pass is on PC as well. And now Microsoft owns StarCraft and World of Warcraft, and as well as the stuff they already owned, like Doom and Age of Empires and all that sort of stuff.
I suppose the other thing with Nintendo specifically, I reckon if they went to go and get them, the Japanese government would fairly quickly just go, nah, ain't going to happen. And that could still scupper this deal, couldn't it? We could still see regulators saying, actually, no, you can't buy this.
Yeah, because like I said, in terms of gaming revenue, it's not a huge deal. But if they look at it in the tech space and they look at it in terms of Microsoft, which is already so huge and has absorbed so many other companies, if they look at it as them spending billions and billions of dollars on another thing, then you could get into trouble because the American government has been, well, I mean, they're not a united front in any sense of the word, but they have been pretty quick to crack the whip, at least in theory, and say big tech is not going to get any bigger, and we're going to regulate you, and going to break you up, and you got to move your gaming platform to another business, and so that could still happen. It seems to me unlikely, given the gaming space that this is all happening in. But I mean, nothing's for sure. It's going to be at least a year worth of regulation and deliberation. So we'll have to see.
Is this a problem for your smaller developers, for the just genuine independents out there? Because I've seen a lot of rumblings around people saying, "Oh, Game Pass isn't so good if you're a little dev."
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get down to what happens in a few years' time. At the moment, early on in Game Pass, it seemed like a great deal because as a small developer, you could sign up for 2 years of Game Pass, get a big payout right away, not have to worry about selling games to make your money back, and then at the end of it, you've made a name for yourself because you've been on Game Pass for 2 years. Whether or not that's going to keep happening is unclear, right? Because they can't put everything on Game Pass. They need to curate it somewhat, or it's going to end up like the Nintendo eShop where you open it up and you're just bombarded with garbage that you don't want to buy. They have to curate it, and so that means a lot of smaller games are going to be fighting to get in there, or they're just going to be on the store where you have to buy them for $20, and people are going to go, "That's 2 months of Game Pass. I could buy this one game, or I could have 2 months of Game Pass. Like, why would I do that?" So I guess it is a case of those smaller games might have to carve out different niches, or they might have to try different monetization methods. But you see the likes of, Devolver, which is a mid-sized publisher, still pretty small, and they're doing extremely well. Putting their games on all platforms. Sometimes they go into Game Pass, sometimes they don't. But it's just a matter of they're running their business and they're chasing their niche, and they're keeping costs as low as they can, and it's working out for them. So obviously the paradigm going forward is not going to work for some people, but I like to think we're going to see other methods emerging, whether it's people going strictly on whatever the future equivalent of itch.io is, where you just go on PC and you buy your weird little game and you throw the guy $5. Whatever the future paradigm is, I think there'll be room for those kind of games because there's an audience for those kind of games.
Well, speaking of future methods, I'm someone who enjoys collecting physical media. I know you do too. I think I can see a Dreamcast over your shoulder there, in fact.
Sure can.
And but this is not great for those of us who like physical media, though, because Game Pass is obviously where Microsoft's headed with all of this, and it's totally rental software. They're spending a lot of money to own Activision so they can rent bits of it to us.
Yes. Yeah. Over here where you can't see, I've got a collection of like just series where I've got everything of each series. And my Halo one, I'm sort of stuck because I don't know whether to buy a physical copy of Halo Infinite and Halo the Master Chief Collection because I have them on Game Pass already. Why would I spend money on that? But also I'm looking at it and going, they should be there. And in the future, that's not even going to be an option. Like I could print out a little card and put it there to show people that I like the game. But I mean, it's not going to be the same. And I mean, I think that's just where things are going. It's if you look at other entertainment mediums, it's happened with music and it's happened with movies where you can still get Blu-rays, and there's reasons you would as a movie lover, and same thing with CDs. And there's also, a market for vinyls, which used to be you had to buy the old vinyls pressings, which is what we do now with games. And you can see where that market's gone, where there are premium repressings of games, and you could always see Square Enix come in and say, "We're doing new pressings of Final Fantasy VI, and it's $100," and we'll all go, "Okay," because we're idiots, and we'll do that. So I think it's definitely going to change, and it's getting to the point where some of my stuff that's 30 years old is just disintegrating. So the question of whether I'm going to be able to keep collecting it, I think there's a lot of reasons I won't, and one of them definitely is that going forward, everything's going to be digital. You're probably not even going to have it installed locally on your hard drive. It's going to come in over the internet, just like it does on Spotify.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes. Thanks so much for your time, Tim.
No worries. Thank you.
Well, that static sound reminds me that Adam clearly ducked out of the studio 25 minutes ago, and I've been doing all the work
I just
here
went
this
off
week.
to get a drink. How are you guys doing without me?
But also that static sound, of course, means that it's time to wrap up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to John and Tim for making time earlier for the show, and thanks, of course, to Gus for being in studio with us.
Well, thanks for not stealing my phone number.
Yet.
Yes, it's early.
Now, Gus, you've been a guest on the show many, many times. You know what? You're about to be hit with the Vertical Hold classic 3 questions of doom. You can answer these in any order you like. I will hit you with all 3 at once. Where can people find your social media online? Where can they find your work online? And based on what we discovered at CES, with scientists developing robot cats, what animal should be made into a robot next and why?
Well, you can find my work online at finder.com.au. You can find me on Twitter at GusWorldAU. And I was thinking about the important question of robot pets. At first, I thought, robot pet rock, that'd be great. But then I realized that's basically what a Sony Aibo is right now. So I thought we've got to aim a bit higher. And what I think would be really cool is a robot pet giraffe. Like, let's get some scale into this thing. And, like, maybe as well as being like a fun pet, if you live in an apartment building, that could be a way of you connecting better to the fiber in the basement and then actually getting a better signal than you might get otherwise.
That's excellent. Although I think you will find that the robot pet rock is also covered by any iPhone 13 mini after about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, via the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or at verticalhold.com.au.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and tell your friends to help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
That is not going in the end credits.
So glad I forgot to hit stop.
We don't have enough money to get sued.
Now
Phil
I
doesn't
should
have
hit
enough money
stop.
to sue anybody.